And so please provide a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest, Sam Williams.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Jimmy. And it's nice to be back on campus. I wore my tie today. And thank goodness for what happened in Ireland, huh? We don't have to hide from the Bulldogs yet. But they got through it all right too. So Lori asked me today to talk about some of the things that I've experienced in leadership. I was a double E co-op, as Jimmy mentioned, and I was very involved in student government. And then there is no career ladder, is one thing I'll tell you. People want to know, well, I start on this rung and go to that rung and go to this rung and go to that rung. Forget it. Seize your opportunities, look for things that interest you, and if it really, really engages you, I'd encourage you to take a chance and go with it. My biggest break was that I met Mayor Ivan Allen, who was also a tech grad, and I worked for him for a year, and he thoroughly inoculated me about how cities work or how they don't work. And in fact, he told me when I said career ladder and business plan, he said, let me tell you, I was president of a major furniture company here when I got elected mayor. I was a businessman. I had 5 things I was going to get done. I had a business plan. The civil rights movement happened. It wasn't on my business plan. And that became the defining moment in his era as mayor. So sometimes the things that you get into were not in your business plan, and you got to deal with them as they are. But today I'm going to talk about my book. CEO is Urban Statesman. I've got some copies here. If people want to buy them afterwards, I'll hawk them for you, sign them. But today, this is the CEO's Urban Statesman, and it's about business leaders who stepped into huge, messy political problems that kept their cities from being successful. Here are about a few that I've been involved with since I was at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Winning the Olympics, unbelievable. Changing the Georgia flag, one of the nastiest things I've ever been engaged with. Promoting world trade to the point now, after the Olympics, we had 600 international companies in Atlanta. Today we have almost 2,000. If somebody says, what did the Olympics do for Atlanta? That's what they did. And of course the water wars that are historical between Alabama and Florida suing Georgia, that case is now in the Supreme Court, among other things. Some of the groups that I've worked with on some of these issues are on the screen, universities as well as business organizations and others. The book is about 5 different cities, case studies, how business leaders help define those cities, help them solve great big problems, or help them seize opportunities that political leaders either would not or could not get engaged with. And the book is really about the pain, the gain, and the call to action. The pain is that many of our big cities today are just strangled with traffic, sound familiar? Infrastructure issues, things of a regional nature, and they can't seem to solve them. Part of this problem is that our forefathers who wrote the U.S. Constitution never dreamed of something like Metro Atlanta. General Oglethorpe, the founder of Georgia and the signer of the U.S. Constitution, his theory of government is you had the federal government, you have the state government, and you had county governments. Cities were nothing. Cities don't have any prominent part of the Georgia Constitution. It's state, federal, county. That's the way federal money comes. Very little federal money goes to cities. So cities have gotten strangled in this thing, but it's not really the fault of our mayors. It's this federal, state, county structure. And particularly when you get multiple counties involved. I was very involved almost 3.5 years ago in the T-Splost, if any of you here heard of the T-Splost. It was a referendum to pass a 1-penny sales tax for Metro Atlanta, 16 counties, to pay for improved roads and expanded transit. It failed miserably because the squabbling and the fighting between our ex-urban and urban leaders tore it apart. So what do we got today? We got some of the worst traffic in the United States. But these problems are not unique to Atlanta. Now, the game here is that some cities have tapped the leadership of business executives who don't have to get elected. Most mayors and county commissioners cannot see. Their vision is no further than 4 years. That's when they get reelected. If I can't fix it in my first term, I'm out. Business leaders can take a longer-term view. They don't have to get elected. But the gain here also is that if you pick an issue that what I call it a tipping point, this issue is so severe, if you don't fix it, it's going to really, really hurt your city. Or it's an opportunity that if you pass it up, you were an idiot, and competitive cities may seize that opportunity. So it's that tipping point, and then the real big issue is that this partnership has never been more important because our cities are getting more and more complex. The economy of America today is driven by metro cities, not states, by metro cities. The big metros in the southeast, Atlanta, huge. Then you've got Jacksonville, you got Miami is sort of out on its own. Then you've got the Memphis and the others, Charlotte, etc. These big metro cities are so critical to the future, and they're where the big airports are located as well. The call to action is identify this tipping point issue in your city. Then recruit a business leader, what I consider is an urban statesman. A leader, a man or a woman who has achieved enough that people say, this person is a credible leader. A person who doesn't have a conflict of interest, who's not going to get rich because they do something in the public interest. And then create a coalition of people around that leader of different points of view. Get everybody under the tent, even though they don't like each other. My saying is you better have them under the tent or they're going to tear the tent down from outside. And then to create a staff group, whether it could be a university, a consulting firm, a chamber of commerce, or somebody to help establish facts with this coalition of leaders sitting around the table. I like to say everybody's entitled to their own opinion. They're not entitled to their own facts. And once you get people listening around a table on a controversial, tough issue, and a McKinsey consulting firm or a Chamber of Commerce or a Georgia Tech or someone comes in and starts presenting all of the research and the data, you suddenly start getting heads to nod and you boil it down into 3 or 4 things, and then you create an action plan and you get it done. The first case study, Grady Hospital. Anybody here ever been to Grady? You don't have to be ashamed of it. It's a great hospital, only 2 or 3. Well, if you've seen the billboards, if you get in a severe car crash in Atlanta, you better go to Grady, or chances are you may not live. Grady is the only level 1 trauma center in North Georgia. But about 8 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago, it was threatened to close. The publicity was national. It was the kind of thing you didn't want to read in the New York Times. And it was all about the safety net hospital in Atlanta, Georgia was going bankrupt. It was going to close its doors. It belonged to Fulton County and DeKalb County governments. It's over 100 years old. But it was in decline, and the political people in charge of it did not have the political guts to step in and fix it. It was also very politically charged with appointments of people who had political interest rather than medical professionals. And into this steps 3 business executives. They got together and said, we cannot let Grady fail. Why? Well, number 1, it's a poverty hospital. But number 2, if those poor people, 1 million patients a year, Grady closes, where are they going to go? They're going to go to Piedmont, to Northside, to Wellstar. Every other hospital within 30 to 40 miles is going to be full of people trying to get medical care. For an economic development point of view, a company moving here is very concerned about the status of health care in a metro area. So there were some real issues here. The group met with the Chamber of Commerce providing the research. There were people around the table who were very controversial, who did not like each other, but who agreed to sit and listen to the facts being presented by consultants Alvarez and Marcel. And they came down to several conclusions. One conclusion is you need to privatize the hospital and not make it a political organization. There are some leaders, particularly in the African American community, who did not like that because the board and the appointees were predominantly African American. Now, the patient base is also African American, so there was a real fear that the hospital would not care for the black poor of Atlanta. Demonstrations were constant. I remember there was a state senator who handcuffed himself to the Chamber of Commerce door. WSB carried at least 3 stories a week on this issue. Can you imagine serving on that task force? But in this recommendation of privatizing it, the concerned black clergy in Atlanta, who are the top preachers of African American churches, they got together and said, wait a minute, we can't let demonstrators keep this hospital from being saved. And they met with the task force and they said, we'll agree to endorse you, but you got to do one thing. You've got to guarantee in writing and law that Grady will always be there to serve the poor. The business leaders said, no problem. These 3 business leaders now are hailed as heroes. They've raised $325 million in 7 years. Grady is now among the top 10 safety net hospitals in the nation because of what they do. It's an unbelievable miracle of turning that hospital around. Salt Lake City had the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, and they enjoyed some transportation improvements. They created a small transit system, a lot of highway improvements, but afterwards they said, we really want more now. And the regional plan was said, well, we'll take 20 years with the current flow of money we've got. And this gentleman who had been in the Utah Senate was the liaison with the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City. He stepped forward and said, we need to organize a coalition of business leaders. And he got this gentleman, Scott Anderson, to head it up. And they created a task force. They hired HNTB, a professional transportation consulting firm, to come in. They had a lot of public hearings. That's the key to all these things I'm telling you, is you got to do them in public. You can't do them in secret. And they created a plan, what they called the 2015 Alliance, that went public and said, we've got to create transit throughout the Wasatch Valley, north-south. Is anybody here from Salt Lake? Nobody here from Salt Lake. They created a plan. They had a sales tax proposal, and unlike Atlanta, they passed it. Today, that transportation improvement in the north-south Wasatch Valley is one of the best in the nation, and they've got more construction going on than any major city in America because the business leaders stepped into the vacuum where political leaders could not agree and where the counties north-south in the Wasatch Valley could not agree on how they were allocating the money. Columbus, Georgia. Anybody here from Columbus? You got to have somebody from Columbus in here. Yeah, we got one guy here. Has anybody been down the Chattahoochee River in Columbus? All right, this is what I'm going to tell you, how that got done. Columbus is home to some great companies. Aflac, the duck, Thesis, Synovus, many others. And about 10 to 12 years ago, they could not get young people like you to move to Columbus. The business community panicked and said, if we can't get people to move to Columbus, what are we going to do? We're going to have to move our companies to Atlanta. We don't want to move up there. And they said, why don't they want to come to Columbus? They did some research, and the perception was that Columbus was a mill town, and it had been, and that the old textile mills had closed down, leaving the city really devoid in the center. John Turner, who was a local family CEO company, created this coalition with Columbus State University. He was very involved. The university there played a big role. They did a lot of research. They helped the business community and others. They went around the country and saw other cities that had done some turnarounds. They looked at Chattanooga, which 20 years ago was in real chaos, and now Chattanooga's really come out. They created an idea of let's make the Chattahoochee River a whitewater rapid. Well, when John Turner announced that, the headlines were, "The guy's insane. You can't make the Chattahoochee River a whitewater rapid." First of all, there were a lot of dams on the river that had been there since the Civil War. Columbus, well, you know why Columbus is called on the Gnat line? Yeah, because it's where the Piedmont Plateau falls off to the Savannah Plain. There's an elevation difference there of anywhere from 300 to 500 feet. So you got a lot of waterfalls, there used to be. They dammed it up, but also the strange thing is below that line, if you go to the beach, you know what pesky gnats Georgia's got. But above that line, for some mysterious reason, the gnats don't fly. So it's on the gnat line and it's on the fall line. A little piece of trivial history for you. It took 12 years for that group to come up with enough funding and enough technical knowledge and ideas to say, we're going to create the Chattahoochee Whitewater, and today it's a cool city. They bought these old dams, they blew them up. This little machine right here is a wave machine. It throws the river up into the air. It's a Class 4 whitewater rapid where that one is. It's called Cut Bait. Is that the name of it? I think it is. If anybody's been down it, anybody want to talk about what it was like to go down it?
I brought a bunch of family members. We ran a Petrie Road race and then went down to Columbus and went over to the Army Museum after that because my father had been 101st Airborne, so we went to see that. But yeah, they've done some remarkable things there. So, I've done whitewater in other places in the southeast.
Yeah.
And it's a very good whitewater run there.
Anybody else been down it? Want to say what it was like? Would you want to swim down it? I don't think you would.
It's fresh water though, so you don't mind drinking at it.
Yeah, but it's just it's a Class 4 whitewater rapid, and that's John Turner when they opened the gates, and now they've got all kinds of enthusiasts. And guess what? Young people love Columbus. The Columbus State University's moved a campus downtown. They've got loft housing. It's like the West Side here, if you really want to see what that city's like. Again, a business executive stepped up because mayors and county commissioners and others. Hell, this happened when Alabama was suing Georgia over the Chattahoochee River. Can you imagine a more hostile environment to try to go in and say, let's work together and build a whitewater rapid on the river? Phoenix City, Alabama, and Columbus, Georgia have historically hated each other. They got them to work together. Houston, Texas, another famous city, port city, and Hurricane Ike hit this city, and it was horrendous. Billions of dollars worth of damage at the time, and particularly small businesses couldn't get back on their feet. Governor Rick Perry, the state governor, appointed a business leader, Mae Jamison, the first female African-American astronaut. She was an urban stateswoman, and he appointed her to put together a coalition of people to examine how can we get small businesses, mom and pop stores and others, back on their feet, because there were disaster recovery groups working in other areas, but not on rebuilding businesses. And she created a task force, a coalition, met with a lot of leaders, 18 citizens on it. The Houston Partnership provided technical staff for them. They came up with some great ideas, great plans. The governor passed them into state law, and today it is really sort of a landmark of how do you rebuild a city after a hurricane's hit it, particularly from a business point of view. Red Cross and other groups were working in other areas, but this was aimed at rebuilding a city. There's a great story about Oklahoma City. Oklahoma, I don't know, you probably not even here old enough to remember the bombing in Oklahoma City. That was homegrown terrorism, where a couple of really wacko, crazy guys drove a truck up to the front of the federal building filled with fertilizer and diesel fuel, which is a particularly potent combination, blew it up and killed, I think, 75 to 100 people. It was also right in front of a daycare center. It was the depths of a city's depression. United Airlines moved their maintenance facility out of town. Oklahoma City was in a funk. And this guy, who's Ray Ackerman was an advertising executive, and he became a fan of water. And again, the tipping point, creating a task force, the mayor was involved with it. They brought in some technical experts. They also looked at water as a solution to reviving the city. But they had a problem because the North Canadian River, which flows through Oklahoma City, as Ray Ackerman told me in writing a book, he said, we've got the only river in America that's mowed 3 times a year because it was nothing there but for stormwater purposes. Otherwise, it was dry. They persuaded the Corps of Engineers to build a dam on the river, creating a lake, and then diverted the lake through downtown Oklahoma City and created, you can see there, that was under construction. This is the river that they created, and then they routed that downtown river through what was old industrial areas into Bricktown Canal, and now they've even gone further and created an Olympic training course right through the middle of downtown Oklahoma City. The Olympic athletes going to Rio trained right here from the U.S. So what's the lesson out of all these case studies? I really came up with sort of 5 things. If you don't want to remember anything else I've said to you today, these 5 things are: number 1, find an issue that's at a tipping point crisis, or a tipping point opportunity. And the second thing is to find the right kind of leader and a sponsoring organization to host these events in the public eye. The third thing is be invited in. One of the things that we faced in Grady Hospital is that we said we have no purview to help fix Grady unless we're asked by the people who own Grady to help. If you're trying to tell somebody how to fix something and they own it and they don't like it, it's just not going to happen. So you got to be invited in. And the next one is define the mission, the scope of work, and then develop these action plans. Create facts, not opinions, and then drive those to a conclusion and use the coalition that you've created to help make it work. And that, to me, is the real solution, is transparency with the public and the press. If you do this right with the media while you're going through it, the public will know all about what you're trying to advocate instead of waiting till the end. And if you don't invite the media in, they're going to find out anyway, and they're usually going to find out from people that want to tell the bad part of what you're doing. So the best thing to do is have them in up front. And that's what I would call how business leaders around the country are helping to fix our big American cities. So I'd be glad to entertain questions.
Sam, let me start off with a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
First of all, thanks for coming back to Georgia Tech today. And I guess my question is, what is the incentive for a business, for a CEO? Let's say Jim Turner in Columbus. I think his family owns W.C. Bradley. Is that
Yeah, they do.
right? And what is the incentive for a guy like that who's got a day job, his family business, he's probably got all he can handle anyway, just running the business, to take time out of that to in effect, try to create change in the community?
Well, I think part of it is that these business leaders have a big sense of civic commitment. They want their city to be successful. And in many of these cities, when the city's successful, the chances are that that helps businesses be much more successful too. It's hard for a business to be, can you imagine trying to run a big company in Detroit after what happened to them? I mean, it was the pits. Companies left in droves. So it's a sense of the company has an obligation to the city to try to help it, the workers of that company or citizens of the city. But it's a good question. And many cities are lucky in doing that. Some really struggle with trying to get the civic leadership engaged in fixing the city. And I'd say that also applies to universities. I've done enough work in about 15 other cities to know that there are some universities that are really hands-off. They don't want anything to do with their city. They're sort of, we're gown and they're town, and ne'er the two meet. Georgia Tech has done a great job of reaching out to the city. in getting engaged, for example. So there are other, Tulane University, for example, is one of the best in the country at doing that. At Tulane, if you're an undergraduate student, did I hear a Tulane grad back there? Whistling. If you're an undergrad in Tulane, you've got to do I think it's 8 hours of academic internship undergrad to graduate in the community.
So
Next question.
Just to follow up on that, though, the CEOs are doing this because by creating better communities, it's what creating better environments for their employees.
Yeah, and it draws the best employees to move there. Tulane now, the graduates of Tulane want to stay in New Orleans.
Okay.
So the relationship between Tulane and New Orleans is better than it's ever been.
I'm Austin. I'm a
Yeah, Austin.
computer engineer.
I don't think your mic's on.
It is.
Oh, there it is.
All right. Do you think you could apply the same thinking about tipping point issues on a small scale with cities to the country as a whole? Or do you think it's more complicated than that?
It's more complicated than that. There might be some examples of that.
Okay.
But it's, you've just got so many complexities at a federal level that, good gosh, right now our Congress and our government are just dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And I don't know that any CEO is going to be able to turn that around. Because there's so much partisanship on both sides, it would be tough. I wouldn't want to be the CEO try to do that. Yes, sir. Oh,
Hi, Sam. Greg.
Greg?
So you talk about finding the right leader, and just kind of wondering what kind of qualities do you think that they need to have, and how involved are they with your fourth point, which is about defining that mission? So how much are they involved in defining that mission?
Well, I think that sometimes it takes a consensus of other leaders to say, we all agree this is an issue that's just tragic, Grady Hospital. And then it sort of gets to be a consensus that this is the tipping point issue. Generally, you can go into a big city and you'll find out just sitting in a restaurant or a bar or having a meeting, what's wrong with this city? Oh, God, traffic, it sucks. I mean, you can tell that in Atlanta real quick. Then it's trying to find who is a leader who may not be an expert in this issue at all, but here's a leader who is universally respected. Wayne Clough played a critical role when the city of Atlanta was ordered by the federal court to spend over $5 billion on its sewer system. Mayor Shirley Franklin at the time, anybody know who Wayne Clough is? President of Georgia Tech. He created Tech Square 10 years ago. Need to educate our students, Terry. We're here. But the mayor at that time was under pressure to store stormwater with sewage water mixed in ponds above ground because that was the cheapest thing to do. Can you imagine filling a pond above ground with mixture of rainwater and sewer water together? Because we have here what's called a combined sewer overflow. Well, the mayor of Atlanta asked Wayne Clough to convene a group of leaders in the whole water industry from around the country to pursue best practices of how can we fix this problem. Well, President Clough came up with the idea of digging tunnels under the ground that were huge. You could drive a trailer truck through them. And when a storm comes and the combined sewer and stormwater gets together, it goes into the tunnels, is stored, and then is treated slowly when the rain and storm are gone, when the sewage plants are able to process it. But he was an urban statesman in that regard because he was highly respected. And people knew that he didn't have an axe to grind, whichever way it came out. So sometimes it's getting that leader. Mae Jemison, the astronaut in Houston, she didn't have any interest in storms particularly, but it was a leader that people universally agreed that, that's a sound person. She's got good judgment. She's successful. So those are some of the criteria. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Sam. My name is Andrew. And so your case studies today were very helpful. A lot of them focus on infrastructure. And I was just curious, What do you think the role or responsibility of a CEO might be around policy or state laws? I think of Salesforce and Mark Benioff in North Carolina, for example, and their decision to put jobs there or not put jobs there.
Sure.
Do you think that it's a CEO's place, and what kind of responsibility do you think they have regarding where they do business and the laws in which they do business?
That's a great question. I think you've seen business leaders in the last 10 years step forward. Well, changing the flag was a great example in Georgia. Because a lot of people thought that changing the flag was, we ought to leave it alone. In rural Georgia, it was thought that that's our flag. In Atlanta, people thought, well, there's symbols of racism around this, etc. But when you saw some states start dealing with issues like guns on campus, religious freedom, gays and lesbians, you saw business leaders start standing up and saying, whoa, wait a minute. This is not conducive to business. This is not conducive to international trade. And they stepped out of their comfort zone and put together coalitions. Well, the state legislature of Georgia passed the law on religious freedom, for example, and the business leaders from the Metro Chamber and the Georgia Chamber got together, put pressure on the governor and said, you got to veto the bill. And he did. Look at what's happened in North Carolina. They tried to persuade their governor not to allow that to go into law, and now they've lost the NBA. They've lost several Fortune 500 headquarters prospects. So business is very sensitive to some of these social, political issues, and I applaud them for standing up and what they believe in. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Private CEO engagement in civic issues is great until it isn't. For example, I'll give you two issues. One is the incentivization of the Atlanta public schools that ended up in a disaster with the cheating scandal, and Beverly, really, under fire after being very much supported by the private sector. Secondly, an example just on NPR this week was the Gates money and the Gates Foundation that came from the private sector, and the foundation acting like a private organization, having as much influence as it is on educational reform. And I was pretty stunned that there were negatives were being brought up about that. So I guess my question is, can you comment on some of the downsides of civic engagement by the people with a lot of resources?
Well, I think both of those, the common thread is public education. And I would agree with a lot of business people. Our public education system in this country is broken, severely broken. And it needs drastic improvements. In fact, I've heard a lot of business people say if it hadn't been for FedEx and UPS, the U.S. Postal Service would never have changed. So I'm a big believer now that charter schools are something that will force our public educators to find different ways to educate our children. The Atlanta business community was behind Dr. Hall. They thought she was doing great things. They had no way of knowing whether there was cheating going on or not. And I think that was the mistake that they made when the school board asked the business community to step in and say, do you all see any cheating? Well, unlike the governor's appointing the former state attorney general, the governor gave him subpoena power and also power for depositions under oath. The business community had none of that. I think the business community got duped into being pulled into it without demanding that we've got to have power to determine whether somebody's telling us the truth or not. But I will credit them with one thing. They said they found over 100 educators that needed further legal investigation, and that was not followed up on. Gates, I think, he's gotten to be very strong about charter schools. And the public education community and the United Federation of Teachers is solidly against that. But my theory is UFT they need to back off. We've got to fix the public education system. I think in Georgia, with the Hope Scholarship, we have raised what I call the floor of the college education to SAT scores, but we have not raised the ceiling of our high schools in Georgia. And that gap is continuing to widen. Here's a simple fact about public education in Georgia. About 62 to 68% of students in Georgia graduate from high school in 12 years. It's a question of whose statistics you believe. Well, let's just say it's 65% to be real liberal. So we got about 2/3 of our kids that actually graduate from high school. Of those 65%, about somewhere around 40% of them actually start college, 2-year or 4-year college. And of those 40%, about 15% actually graduate. So we have a throughput in Georgia of 15% who get out when they start. That is a abysmal, failed system. And the way Georgia's dealing with it from a business point of view, we're hiring college students from other places. They're not Georgia kids, because the Georgia kids can't get through college. They can't get through high school. And those that are left out are forevermore going to be a burden on society, or they're going to have real problems making a living. They're the service workers. The other alternative is I think Georgia's doing a great job in its technical education college, because I think those offer some great degrees that are not equivalent to what you're going to get out of Georgia Tech, but you can get a darn good career out of welding and some other technical skills, particularly, well, the hospital industry, medical care, diagnostics, operating CT machines, MRIs, and those kind of things. Great career. So we've got alternatives, but until we almost blow up the public education system and figure out a way to deal with it, we got to, your children are going to have that problem. Good question. Yeah. The question back there?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Steve Van Ginkle. I'm in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And the mayor's office, I don't know if you know, but they created the Urban Farming Task Force.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so Georgia Tech was invited. We've been participating in meetings for about the last 8 months. And Georgia Tech's, I guess, stake is that we want to be high tech. We want to create these high tech aerial productivity.
Hydroponic farming?
Yeah, we call it CEA, Controlled Environment Agriculture. Yeah. And we're building a commercial scale system over by the Structures Lab.
Good.
And so my question is, so the city in the tipping point could be, food deserts, food inequality, or food system lack of resiliency.
Yeah.
And so there's plenty of people in the urban farming space. I know of 216,000 veterans just in the Atlanta metro who want to do some kind of urban farming. My question is, what role does the city have, in perpetuating and trying to get more urban farming? What do you think the city should do to increase urban farming?
I think the biggest thing the city does, and the mayor does as well, is he comes up and provokes something to happen. He can't sustain it over long periods of time. But if he provokes it enough, it will take grassroots in the community to the point that people will start doing it. I think you're seeing that now in the restaurant industry when you look on the menu and it tells you where these vegetables were grown. They were in this area, the beef, etc. So that's beginning to become a social value. And I think people are a lot more interested in what they eat. And they're a lot more interested in where it came from. These shrimp are really good. It came from Vietnam, and they were frozen before they got here. Oh, well, these shrimp came from the coast of Georgia. So there's a confidence, and I think that urban farming is beginning to stimulate a lot of that as well. But it also goes back, I think, to the heart of another big issue that all of you are going to have to deal with. That's sustainability. Is our community sustainable? What is the carbon footprint of our community? What's the carbon footprint of Georgia Tech? There's a great question. There was a huge foundation grant just recently, I think for $15 or $20 million from the Candida Fund to build a carbon neutral building on campus here. I don't know where they're going to put it, but it's a great example. Are you water neutral? Coca-Cola has just been announcing that they're beginning to figure out ways of not wasting water when they make Coca-Cola, instead of letting wastewater run off, purifying it, reusing it. Recycling. I can remember 10 years ago Well, Jim, I don't, maybe it was 15 years ago, people didn't care whether they threw stuff out the window of a car. But now you're taking public attitudes and changing them around sustainability. But you're going to have to deal with that, because within 5 years, this stuff's going to be on your shoulders. You better start thinking about it. Yeah. Uh-oh. This guy and I worked together for a long time when we were both at Portman. He knows too much about me.
Would you talk a little bit about how graduating students can get involved and why that's such a smart thing, get involved in the community, and why that's such a smart thing to do?
Sure. Well, I think part of it is you have to be a successful professional today, you can no longer exist in your silo. You have to have interdisciplinary skills in order to succeed in society or in business. If you're an engineering major, you've got to learn how to get along with people who don't know engineering. If you're a financial person, you've got to be able to get along and understand people that are in research. The geeks and the poets have got to learn to communicate. And that's certainly true in society, and it gives you a great opportunity as an intern or in volunteer work to get out of your cocoon and listen to people and know how to deal with people that don't agree with you, that don't think what you're doing is the right thing in the world. Because, you know, you're going to find out, I think, the more you get out into the business world, it's not all one rule and one size. One size does not fit all. And you're also going to learn that creative destruction is completely obliterating industries that everybody, taxi cabs, I wouldn't want to be a taxi cab driver today. Uber's going to wipe them out. Amazon, destroying the retail industry. So there's a lot of creative destruction. But you've had some people that were trained and they spent their whole life working for Macy's. All of a sudden, Macy's ain't going to be there. So what are you going to do? You need to be able to learn how to get out of that little cocoon, that silo, if you will, that you've been in. I think when I was here, man, it was silos were built out of carbon steel. They're a lot more open now, and I would credit people like Terry and others who have made sure that students have to work with teams, because you're going to do that when you get out in the business world. And if you don't learn how to do it, you're not going to go up, because the most successful people are ones who know how to deal with teams of men and women. I'm glad to see that here. Teams that are diverse in racial and ethnic culture. You got to be able to do that. So, the long-winded answer, Jim, but he knows more about it than I can say anybody else. So if you want to know who to go to, Jim can help you figure that out. I don't want to keep you guys too long because I don't want anybody walking out on me.
Thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.